Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, despite what the others may say, I am not here opposing just for opposition's sake or complaining. I am here because, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that this is necessarily the way we need to deal with these things. I had the fortunate or unfortunate opportunity to go through Ivan. And at that time, we only had the provision to institute emergency. Under the governor, and we had the unfortunate situation where the emergency was put in place by the then governor, and I think, Mr. Speaker, there are some of us in here who knows what happened then. Someone else ran the country because under an emergency, the governor has absolute authority. And someone else was running the country, whereas that then governor was lost in oblivion someplace and crying. Really? On a laugh. And I don't know what we went through, you know. Not much you know what we went through. Mr. Speaker, we tried all how, after becoming the government in 2005, to change that. The Attorney General knows all about that. In order that this legislature would be involved. We were unceremoniously rejected. Not until 2016 the now Premier remember all of it, and we got a little piece under the police law. I still don't think that is enough. Now that we are where we are, Mr. Speaker, and whether we are criticized for handling it good, bad, or indifferently. You heard my letter to the Premier saying one voice on these matters. This was since March. Whether we did it right or wrong, regardless of who gets benefits or get criticized for it, I believe the time has come for us to do bespoke legislation when we have these emergencies. Because no matter what you do, Mr. Speaker, you cannot satisfy everybody, and you are going to encroach on people's liberties when you have a few individuals making decisions of that nature, that whilst you're in the middle of an emergency and you need to try and control the spread of disease or save lives or whatever you want, whatever the situation we may be facing. I believe that it's time to do bespoke legislation and make it come to this legislative assembly in order that the public is aware of it, and all representatives get involved in it. All members of this honorable house stay involved. Because we have now changed the standing orders to allow Zooming and having meetings with through electronic means. So it doesn't mean that the House needs to necessarily be here, but we can do it through Zooming. We need to do it before we encroach unnecessarily on people's liberties and their freedoms. And then only a select few are allowed to make those decisions. Mr. Speaker, I don't believe we can piecemeal and make amendments to legislation for this purpose, for the purpose that we're doing here. We are still in a crisis. The pandemic is still raging, and I believe the time has come to do bespoke legislation for this particular thing, which will not require us to amend this piece of legislation to try to assist, because next week we may be coming back to amend another piece. So all of these scenarios needs to be put, provisions have to be made, and we come down here and we debate legislation and put it in place. And then we can come back and amend it as we see fit, or give provisions for regulations. Without any disrespect to anyone, it should not be under the public health law. That should not be the last resort for this kind of thing. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I came here in 2000, and from the time I came here, this piece of legislation was, everybody was threatening to upgrade it and repeal it. I have had opportunity to look at UK public health law, particularly when this came out. And the structure there has the different disciplines under one particular person or one particular minister. We need to do something like that here. Because, Mr. Speaker, garbage collection, Department of Environmental Health, the chief medical officer, everybody under one piece of legislation. It's unnecessary. It's time now that we did something to this piece of legislation. And now that we have had this experience with this crisis, with this pandemic, it's time somebody sit down and do it. We threatened in 2005, 2004, that we were going to do it again when we had Hurricane Ivan. Every time we become inundated by rain and we have drainage problems, we threaten to do it. And we have not done it. Maybe it's time now. Maybe this one is warning enough for us to separate these things. Because on the ground it is separated. DEH is separated from public health, quote unquote. Has its own department, yet it's control under the public law. Certain aspects of it, public health law. When Dr. Kumar was here as the chief medical officer, right? No, the chief public health officer, which was separate and apart again.
He wasn't chief, he was medical officer of health.
Medical officer of health. He was responsible for public health, though.
Right.
We have had so many little departments created. It's time to change this now. And then make provisions for bespoke legislation when we have situations like we currently are experiencing. Mr. Speaker, so much of this, all we're doing is a little piece here and a little piece there, and this one with the $10,000, there are other areas in here that are just as serious, and it's only $100. That's my concern. Such as transporting somebody with an infectious disease, $100. But the areas that there are no, and I believe it's like 4 or 5 places I have found, we're doing that to $10,000. Those to $10,000. I mean, I would even be more receptive to it, Mr. Speaker, if we had changed some of the other ones, the real serious ones. For instance, whoever, being the owner, driver, or carrier of a public conveyance, knowingly conveys in any public conveyance a person suffering from a notifiable disease, knowingly places in any public conveyance a person suffering from any notifiable disease, or being a person suffering from any notifiable disease enters a public conveyance, is guilty of an offense and liable on conviction of a fine of $100. Yet we are only talking about those that has no fines attached to it. Maybe we need to really look at all of this and put $3,000 on all of it straight across the board. Because we can still spread it, and it's not under that 10,000. And I may be far off track, but I'm no medical person. Far from it. But whoever knowingly casts, causes, or permits to be cast into any place designed for the reception or refuse any rubbish infected by an infectious disease without previous disinfection is guilty of an offense and liable on conviction of a fine of $100. And if the offense continues to a further fine of $50 for each day during which the offense so continues after the service of a notice under subsection 2. That does not even apply, Mr. Speaker. Somebody can take it down to the disposal and at the dump, at the entrance to the dump. And I don't know how common sense can tell me I should we should know that it could spread from there. Mr. Speaker, those are the things I think that we need to look at. We can't just, and I understand what the minister is trying to do. I understand that. He's trying to deter people from these isolation places. But there are other areas that we need to address. And the reason we are missing them is that this piece of legislation is not fit for purpose. If we're going to try to deter them from coming out of the isolation places, then we need to try and deter them from doing other things too. And I don't see it. And I'm only trying to be helpful. I think that I still believe the minister, the premier needs to bring bespoke legislation for this period here that we're in. We got brilliant, what age people name drafters that can do that. And we put sunset clauses in there that it shall fall away after it declared free or whatever by the, I don't know, chief medical officer or cabinet or on advice to cabinet or whatever. Simple. That's how I believe going forward we need to do it. And we have time now. We have time because this thing is going to be around here for a while. You're likely to be old by the time this gone. Gray hair like be tripping you down. So while I understand, I want the minister and the Attorney General to look seriously and doing some bespoke legislation now for this period. And I got whatever he named it, Lee, Chief Medical Officer. Make him help on over there. None of you just coming down here and changing one little piece this week and next week we come change another little piece. We have enough brain power around here to think up of all the scenarios that we just went through. We just spent 6 months, 7 months dealing with the same thing. You cannot have that many scenarios that you would be leaving out. You cannot have that many. I would be embarrassed if we left out that many scenarios. We can learn from we have learned from other people. We see what they went through. Let's put legislation in place so that we don't have to worry about the public health thing. We can refer to it. But the public health law can stand alone we can refer to it as the authority given under that, Mr. Speaker. But we need to do a little more than put $10,000 fine in this public health law. And then we won't be challenged by people of encroaching on their liberties. It's legislation. If they challenge us, then the court will have to say it's incompatible. But that's what I want to see, Mr. Speaker. I challenge the minister. I challenge the Attorney General and all his drafters and the Chief Medical Officer and the little Williams, what his position is? What his position is now? Medical Officer of Health. I challenge all of them to sit down and put their gray matter together and come up with bespoke legislation to deal with this crisis that we're on now. Let's not see next month, November, when we come back, we got another amendment to the public health law for another crisis. Within a crisis. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Northside.
Mr. Speaker, I too have some concerns about the breadth of this amendment, and I agree with much of what the Leader of the Opposition has said. Because as he pointed out, there are offenses under the current offenses under the public health law which could be directly related to spreading the COVID disease, such as carrying a COVID-infected person in a vehicle. And the other one he used was 31, who knowingly casts COVID-infectious vase where somebody could get infected. So I would ask the minister to consider rewording Clause 2 to make this fine applicable to COVID disease regulations, as opposed to any offense in the public health law which does not currently carry a penalty. I think the simplest way to do it, and that would also, I believe, prevent the other suggestion from the Leader of the Opposition that we have to come back again to amend it because we forgot some other little part. I think what we're trying to do, and I support what we're trying to do in increasing the fine for people who break the COVID restrictions that we are putting in place to prevent the spread of the disease. So I believe if the legal drafting people can find ways to put into this clause words that relates it and ties it to restrictions made by regulation or otherwise under the public health law, that the offense for that carries a $10,000 fine, then, Mr. Speaker, I believe I can support the legislation, but I have some concerns about it being such a wide brush as to the public health law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I shall be brief. Mr. Speaker, I want to, first of all, thank the Minister and his team for bringing this amendment to the public health law. Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Opposition said, this is, we do want this to be a deterrent to persons who are in home isolation and who might breach our home isolation. But I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, is that we did look around at other territories. Other countries were charging people for that, or the laws. Mr. Speaker, we found countries that had penalties from $6,000 to $750,000. Canada has a really high penalty for persons who breach their home isolation. So it's $750,000.
Isolation for COVID?
COVID.
That's specific?
Yes, COVID.
It's not specific.
So, Mr. Speaker, I think what we have put forward is reasonable. And, Mr. Speaker, I do want to give some assurances that, there is not one thing that we are doing to trying our best to keep the public safe and to keep persons that are to be in isolation for them to remain. So just to give a bit, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, just to give a bit of background of some of the things that we are doing in addition to this law. So we have the technology, I Am Safe bracelet, that we put on every traveler that arrives that goes into home isolation. That is monitored by a team at 911 24/7. We have a dashboard there that if the person does go outside of the geo-fenced area, that they get an alert. We have boots on the ground. We have a team of officers, again, going around, checking at people's homes, knocking on doors, asking them to show themselves through the window, just to make sure that they're at home. We have another call center of persons who are calling our persons and checking on them, and also taking calls from persons who are in isolation. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a huge operation by the public service to deal with home isolation, for keeping people safe in home isolation. Mr. Speaker, up until I think Monday, there were over 600 people in home isolation. Mr. Speaker, that is a lot of persons to monitor. That is hundreds of homes. So this is a massive operation, and we don't want to just depend on the bracelet, the boots on the ground. We think we have to have a series of measures, and one of those measures is this amendment to the public health law, where we're increasing the fine. So if we have a fine that is a deterrent, we have the I Am bracelet, we have boots on the ground, we have a phone monitoring team, we have the I Am bracelet being monitored by the team at 911. We think we have a really good strategy that has really worked well so far, Mr. Speaker. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank the Minister and his team for moving this amendment forward quickly. Thanks to Dr. Lee and everyone else involved, the legal drafters, the acting chief officer, everyone involved. And to pay tribute, Mr. Speaker, to the public servants, the civil servants who are on the road right now doing a very difficult job in maintaining the home isolation, but also keeping us safe. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I call now on the Minister for his right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank members for their contribution. Member for the opposition leader, member for Northside, and Deputy Governor for their contribution. Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, any regulation cannot have a fine above the law. So we raise the penalties under the law so we can do so within the regs. Mr. Speaker, this COVID-19 or coronavirus that is amongst us and throughout the world hasn't been seen by most alive. It's 102 years since something like this has happened. No one expected it. No one saw it coming. And I agree with the member from the opposition leader in terms of trying to legislate morality. As when we had the death penalty, people still committed murder, you know. And the dictionary defines morality as the character of being in accord with the principles or standards of right conduct. Mr. Speaker, exactly what the members mentioned is what we're intending to do to deter. Once we start or open up, the government did a fantastic job in terms of trying to keep us as COVID-free as possible. And but we recognize that at some point we will have to open. We will have to open, and we're trying to do that in a systematic manner and as slowly as possible and as safely as possible. And once we start to open up, we will have people coming from all over the world. So, Mr. Speaker, it is not the regular common man that we're really trying to deter. We believe that our people here in the Cayman Islands, and as we've seen during COVID-19, are law-abiding and orderly citizens. Mr. Speaker, what we have to be mindful of is the man or woman who arrives here who can easily afford to be at a hotel that costs them in their stay $9,000 for quarantine, and that $10,000 is a drop in the bucket if they did a breach of quarantine. So these are also some of the persons that we're trying to ensure that it deter them. Mr. Speaker, as you've heard, in Victoria, Australia, the fine is $20,000 for a COVID fine. In the UK, the COVID breach, the fine is £10,000. For instance, in England, it was a hotel that was fined £10,000 for holding a wedding outside COVID restrictions. So, Mr. Speaker, it's not only an individual, it's also corporations. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, and I hear the leader of the opposition about possibly charging $3,000. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, we don't want anyone to be charged at all. The word deterrence is the actions or discouraging an action or event through instilling doubt or fear of the consequences. The deterrence theory works on these three key elements: certainty, celerity, and severity. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the member for Northside mentioned a very solid point, and I believe this is something I will ask the team to look into this. We have until Monday, I guess, before we go into committee stages. I will ask the team to look at that. We've already spoken to some of the team already, and we will look into that very seriously. Mr. Speaker, I agree. Other areas of the public health law needs amending. I think we all agree. But we have bought tens and thousands. Sorry, we have bought tons of legislation since COVID. Mr. Speaker, before I wrap, before I close, I want to mention that what is set out now is 10,000 from 1,000. Initially, what we thought would be a deterrence, because we were thinking of that person who were traveling here that didn't care about money. Initially, we thought about $50,000. And then we went down to $25,000. And then we settled at 10. So, Mr. Speaker, the government is mindful to take on board some of the suggestions. We'll have to discuss it with the legal team. And I thank the members for their contribution on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question is that a bill shortly entitled Public Health Amendment Bill 2020 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, say no. The ayes have it. The Public Health Amendment Bill 2020 has been read a second time, given the second reading.
Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2020.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2020.
The bill has been duly moved. Honorable Premier speaking thereto.
Mr. Speaker, this very short amending bill is designed to address issues around definitions in the bill. It proposes, Mr. Speaker, to amend Section 4.3 of the Merchant Shipping Law 2016 revision, which relates to qualifications for owning a Cayman Islands ship. The proposal is to amend the definition of approved country by deleting the words Schedule 3 to the Money Laundering Regulations 2015 revision and substituting the words, quote, the jurisdictions that are designated as having measures for combating money laundering and the financing of terrorism which are equivalent to that of the islands in accordance with Section 5.2a of the Proceeds of Crime Law 2020 revision.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The member from Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the members on the official opposition to say that we're pretty okay with this. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty much a no-brainer in this regard, so we're supportive of it. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the Premier to close the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank all honorable members for their support express and tacit, and commend this bill to the House.
Question is that a bill shortly entitled the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2020 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. The Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2020 has been given a second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that brings us as far as I think we can go before going into committee stage on these bills. The one outstanding bill is the Supplementary Appropriation Bill 2020, and the standing orders require that once that bill is moved, the House must then resolve itself into a committee to study the appropriations set out in the schedule to the bill. And so, Mr. Speaker, the next stage would be the commencement of the committee to deal with the current bills. The House could, Mr. Speaker, resolve itself into committee now, but I prefer not to. Some of my ministers may have statements or something to make. I'm not certain. So I'll leave that until Monday. I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, formally what I've said to some members of the House is that the first one up is the Legislative Assembly Management Bill. And there have been some proposed amendments to that. I believe we would all benefit from having some consultation prior to the start of the committee stage. And I would ask members if we can huddle on Monday morning before the House begins so that we can be clear what it is that members will support and what it is members have issues with. I know some members have proposed various amendments, and if we can come to some agreement about that, we should be able to proceed more expeditiously through the committee stage with respect to that bill. So if members could possibly get here a little earlier, it would help us get off the 10 o'clock start. Yes, the suggestion is that we would meet at 9. Let us do our very best. We know some are more challenged than others, but we will. Let's do our collective best, Mr. Speaker. And with that, Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Honorable Premier, before you move the adjournment, I've given permission to the member for Prospect to, I think, bring congratulatory remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to rise in accordance with the standing order. I think it's 12-1 to raise a matter of public importance, which I believe honorable members of this House will agree with and hopefully lend their support to. Mr. Speaker, the 2019 Cayman Islands Government Employee of the Year ceremony, like many things, was delayed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the ceremony was held last evening. As such, I wish to congratulate Miss Lisa Welcome, being awarded the coveted Employee of the Year Award 2019 on behalf of the Honorable Premier, the Unity Government, and all honorable members of this House. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic gave rise to a number of heroes, and in my opinion and that of her peers, Ms. Welcome is certainly one of them. Ms. Welcome works as the personal assistant to the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Community Affairs, which is led by the Honorable Premier and assisted by myself as Councillor, and is responsible for departments like the Needs Assessment Unit, the Department of Children and Family Services that provides oversight over the older person's home, as well as facilities for young people with disabilities. And I think it is fair to say, without fear of contradiction, those two departments, NEU and the Department of Children and Family Services, truly stepped up to provide assistance to our most vulnerable, both during and after the COVID lockdown. Ms. Welcome brings dedication, enthusiasm, compassion, and her very best to every day on the job. And that lends itself, Mr. Speaker, to a truly world-class civil service, as I know the Deputy Governor aims to provide, and in my opinion is someone that the people of the Cayman Islands can truly be proud of. So with those brief words, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage honourable members to offer their congratulations, which I believe are very well deserved, to the Employee of the Year for the Cayman Islands Government 2019, Ms. Lisa Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I could not.
Leader of the Opposition.
I could not allow this to go without having my say. The Deputy Governor this morning, earlier today, said to me that you congratulated Lisa. 7:34 this morning. Congratulations, love. I always knew you were the best, so no news there. That's what I sent to her this morning at 7:34. She has been, when I was minister, she was my rock. So that was not a surprise. She should have had that long time ago. She does everything. Beyond anything that you could even ask of Lisa. I told the Premier, the Deputy Governor, I had two faults with her and I won't repeat them here, but maybe I should. One, she didn't want to take the Cabinet Secretary job. Remember that, Premier? And the other one was she was so dedicated to her children that she couldn't go back to school. And Lisa's from East End, and East End can be justly proud of her, and she's a registering officer for the District of East End. We made her JP recently as well. That just tells you how she is respected in that community. And I am extremely proud of her. I'm a good family friend, and I'm extremely proud of Lisa and her family as well. So I publicly now say congratulations, Lisa, and keep up the good work.
Mr. Speaker, I thought I should get up because to say congratulations to Lisa, because Lisa was also my PA 2013, and definitely as a leader of opposition, say she was my rock. It wasn't anything I asked for that she couldn't find or create, and I definitely think well deserving to Lisa as Employee of the Year. Congratulations, Lisa, welcome.
And the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had a short stint of working with the Honorable Premier and had many interactions with her in her professional capacity, particularly in the Department of Children and Family Services. I want to say congratulations to her too. And in the event that I'm in cabinet, I know who to look for to be my rock when I get on the government side. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And so, honorable colleagues, with some secrets coming to light, I'll ask the Honorable Premier to adjourn the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member for Prospect noted, I am the minister for that portfolio, community affairs. But I deliberately allowed the member from Prospect to, I thought it was quite proper and appropriate to offer the congratulations because he has been, Mr. Speaker, essentially the de facto minister for the last 3+ years of that ministry, and he runs it very efficiently. But I do know, Mr. Speaker, that I know Lisa from back in 2005 when she was the leader of the opposition's PA, and because of that in particular, I know her to be patient and long-suffering. And I want to add my voice of congratulations to her. She's a very, very fine young lady, and a credit to not just the civil service, but to the District of East End and to the Cayman Islands as a whole. Well deserved. Mr. Speaker, with that, I say happy weekend to all members. Be safe in this weather, and I adjourn this Honorable House until 10 a.m. on Monday coming.
Question is that this Honorable Assembly do now adjourn until 10 a.m. Monday, 26th of October, 10 a.m. All in favor? Aye. Those against? No. I think the ayes have it. This Honorable Assembly stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Monday the 26th of October, God willing.